Welcome to episode 21 of The Lowdown Show. I'm Neil Graham. They say you should never poke a bear, but who says we have to listen to what they say? In this episode of the show, we talk to The Bear, the longtime ADVrider.com contributor who joins us from down under. But before we dive in, a word from our sponsor. eBay Motors is here for the ride. With some elbow grease, fresh installs, and a whole lot of love, you transformed 100,000 miles and a body full of rust into a drive that's all your own. Brake kits, LED headlights, whatever you need, eBay Motors has it. And with eBay Guaranteed Fit, it's guaranteed to fit your ride the first time, every time, or your money back. Plus, at these prices, you're burning rubber and not cash. Keep your ride alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. Shall we take the plunge?
Okay, I left school in 1965 with a pretty good result, which got me a scholarship to university. I wanted to do archaeology, and my father said, there is no money in archaeology. I want you to do a commercial subject. And being the obedient German child I was, I opted for economics and lasted 2 years until I decided that really the idea of being an economist was just so incredibly boring that I couldn't face it. At the same time, the printer that we used, the university newspaper, with whom I'd been working because I'd been doing design work on it, offered me a job. So I became a graphic artist overnight. That led me progressively through a number of jobs, including one with Airfix model kits in when I was in London, to being art director of what is now Sony Music, was then CBS Records in Australia. Eventually, after 6 or 7 years of that, I'd had enough, and a friend and I decided we would ride our motorcycles to the Guinness Brewery in Dublin. I have no idea why we chose Guinness. We both drank Guinness, but we drank a lot of other things as well. So I bought an XL250 Honda, the same as his, and we set off in 1978.
And so you were riding from where?
From Sydney.
From Sydney, wow.
In Australia to initially to Dublin. We were received like royalty by the Guinness people. It was quite exceptional, and ended up in London. Charlie and I both got jobs. He finished the trip through the United States and home. I had met a young lady on the ship from Fremantle in Western Australia to Singapore, and I met her again, and we went on another journey. I borrowed a bike from Yamaha, an XS11, and we rode that through Europe, North Africa, over to Turkey, and back to London. I returned it, got back on my XL. She flew home to Australia. I finished the trip through the United States, and on my return to Australia, we decided we'd get married, which we did. 10 years later, I finally gave up my objections to having children. We had 2 girls, both of whom neither of whom I would give up for the world. They're both wonderful, and that's where we are now. I'm now 77. And I'm just beginning to find that there is such a thing as aging.
Well, if you've just discovered that at 77, I think you've got a leg up.
I'm very impressed by that myself. I'm impressed with my body. You know, I have conflicting ancestry. On my father's side, heart disease and very early death. On my mother's side, almost eternal life.
Really? Now, are you going to attribute any of this to those motorcycle rides, do you think? Any of your longevity?
To the what?
Are you going to attribute your longevity to and your vitality to riding a motorcycle?
Look, partly yes, partly I am. I've found that one of the things that kills people is loss of interest in life.
Yes.
I've found that acquaintances and even family members of mine have retired and died, which is terrible, and which I put down to the fact that they had suddenly lost their connection with life, which they'd had through their work. I still work and I still ride, and both of those things, which are essentially the same anyway, both of those things certainly give me an interest in living and make it very difficult to imagine dying. I mean, I'm currently planning another trip to Europe for September, um, and there'll be more after that. So uh, I'm planning them, and therefore I can't possibly die.
Well, once you pay the ticket, it would be foolhardy to die before you've been able to use the ticket.
That's right. That's right. And the my trips to Europe are sponsored, supported by tour operators. I've built relationships with a number of tour operators over the years, and they send me over there. You know, I ask for specific trips, but they offer in general, and I wouldn't disappoint them if I could.
This connection of motorcycling. I mean, motorcycling. It sounds like it's been a lifelong pursuit of yours. But what is it? And I know this is one of those questions that it has become almost a cliche. The wind in the hair, that kind of thing. But what is it? I mean, can you articulate your connection to riding, and what about it interests you? Because there's other ways to move around.
There are other ways to move around, and some of them are certainly more convenient. Um, my wife, Annie, very much enjoyed the 7 months we spent in on that trip on the XS11. But she's also now of the opinion that she's paid her dues and she can now drive. So we do have a car, or she has a car. And so motorcycling, riding isn't the only way I have of getting around. My relationship with motorcycles is possibly a little different from a lot of other people. It isn't a mechanical one. I'm not mechanically minded. I can certainly do basic things like change a tire or tighten a chain, but I don't do mechanical work on bikes because I don't have the confidence to do it properly. And the reason for that is obviously that I haven't done it often enough to get the confidence. I'm simply not terribly interested in the mechanics. What I'm interested in is the unique angle that motorcycles can give you on travel.
You're listening to The Lowdown Show, presented by ADVrider.com and supported by ebaymotors.com. Since we're onto this notion of sort of motorcycles and their reliability and the modern motorcycle. Now, men I'm 17 years younger than you. But a lot of men that fit into our age groups become very nostalgic about BSAs and Triumphs and shovelhead Harleys, and which were often truly wretched motorcycles, their beauty aside. But how do you, because you don't have that mechanical connection, do you still feel a nostalgia towards vehicles, towards the motorcycles you rode when you were younger?
I do, and unfortunately, just over the last 3 years, 2 or 3 years, I have been reminded that modern motorcycles work are more reliable, I suppose, than older ones. I bought a Kawasaki Turbo when they were new. I got the second one into Australia after fighting the country manager of Kawasaki Australia, who also wanted the first one. So I got the second one. I enjoyed it very much. We moved. I was living in Melbourne. We moved to Sydney, to a smaller place. The Kawasaki was one of 6 bikes I had. I didn't have room for 6 bikes in the new place, and I sold it. I regretted that for quite a few years, and then found another one which had been brought in from New Zealand, which came with a very good word of mouth. I bought it, despite the fact that the owner of my regular motorcycle shop said, the thing is old, things will go wrong with it. I bought it anyway, and boy, did things go wrong with it. It needed a new turbo, or reconditioned turbo. And whenever I got it out of the shop, there'd be something else. To the point where I bought it for $11,000. By the time I had spent another $11,000 on it, I was getting tired of it, partly because I couldn't ride it. It was always in the shop. So eventually I had spent something like $14,000 on it. That's Australian, which is, about 80 cents US. And so I sold it. I've just sold it recently. And I don't regret that now. I've got that idea that the bikes that were great when I was younger are still great. That's gone.
You touched on something that I think is kind of interesting, which is that, I worked at a motorcycle magazine for a dozen years, edited one for 7 years. And of course, we'd review these motorcycles and try to be open-minded and, list their merits and their faults. But I think in the end, it doesn't really matter, because we like what we like. It's like music. If you like all-girl punk bands or Stravinsky, you just like it. And I just think the notion of like where we are, I'm in Canada, but in North America, there are so many Harleys. And, and objectively, the early ones especially are not particularly great motorcycles. But tell that to the tens of thousands that ride them. They like what they like. So the notion of, I used to think that, why am I even reviewing, other than that I needed a job? The idea of reviewing motorcycles just seems absurd to me. Or even asking anyone's advice on a motorcycle, unless, of course, you're a dispatch, not a dispatch rider, but a delivery rider in a city, and you need certain, requirements for reliability or something. But we just like what we like, don't we?
Yes. I have 2 stories about that. Would you like to hear them?
Please.
The first one is I've been involved with motorcycle magazines since 78. I started writing. Returning to Australia, I was actually hired as editor of Two Wheels, which is then the leading motorcycle magazine in Australia. And one of the things that you had to do was answer readers' letters. And one of the most popular questions in the letters was always, what bike should I buy? I'm this age. I'm so tall. I do this kind of riding, so on and so forth. And I used to sit there and I used to try and work it out. I would look at specifications for different bikes. I would look at what was popular and therefore would have a reasonable resale value, and so on. And I would write back, and people would write back to me, and they would say, "Thank you for your thoughts and your consideration. I bought the red one," and that in the end was my answer when someone would write to me. I would say two things: one, find a good dealer; two, buy the red one. The red one, of course, being code for the one you really want.
Yes.
Never mind all the practical considerations.
eBay Motors is here for the ride. On this week's Fireside Chat, I'm going to talk about a motorcycle that got away from me. I've never missed any bike that I've owned and gotten rid of. I guess I'm not that sentimental. But here's a story about a bike that I almost bought and didn't, and I kind of wish I did. It was a Kawasaki H2, 72 or 73, the 750 triple. Aftermarket chambers on it. It was in perfect running condition. I took it for a ride. It was incredibly antisocial. It was noisy. It vibrated like crazy. The brakes were appalling. In other words, it was an ideal motorcycle. And here's the catch. It was only $1,500. And I was going to do a story for a magazine in the UK about it. And something happened. And I don't know what I was thinking. I had the money. I just didn't go for it. And I've thought about that bike ever since. Now, you could say I could just go buy one now. But they're more money than I want to spend. And I'm not that curious about it. Anyway, that's my sad story. And now a word from our sponsor. With over 122 million parts, you can make sure your number one ride stays running smoothly. Brake kits, LED headlights, roof racks, bumpers. Whatever your baby needs, eBay Motors has it. And with eBay Guaranteed Fit, it's guaranteed to fit your ride the first time, every time, or your money back. Plus, at these prices, you're burning rubber and not cash. Keep your ride alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only, and of course, exclusions will apply. Now back to my conversation with the bear. A lot of readers on ADVrider lament that there's a certain simplicity that is gone from motorcycles, and that things motorcycles are too big and they're too complex. Where do you stand on that or sit on that?
I can understand the opinion. To some extent, I agree with it, but I've just been at the Australian Motorcycle Museum, the National Motorcycle Museum, and been looking around bikes. And one of the things that you notice is that motorcycles, especially anything older than the 50s or further back, actually isn't terribly simple at all. You have things like the handlebars have more levers on them than motorcycles do today, or even motorcycles in the 50s and 60s did. You have a compression lever. You have all kinds of things, and the side of the tank you have a pump that supplies oil to the engine. You have to do this yourself. And there are a lot of things like that. There are a lot of things that you need to adjust each time you get on the bike. So simplicity is more a wish, I think, than the reality. You usually find that people who hold that opinion haven't really ridden terribly many 30s motorcycles. When 40s, the war kind of disturbed everything. But 30s, even the 40s, I had a 48 BSA Gold Star, and the amount of work you had to do when you rode along, you couldn't just ride. You had to adjust this and that and the other, and so I don't agree with it. The concept, yes, but what is it that's complicated about modern bikes? I mean, for heaven's sake, you don't even need to have to work a clutch anymore. You know, modern bikes aren't complicated. Modern bikes are complicated in themselves, but they're not complicated to work. It's very difficult to think of anything simpler than something with an automatic clutch. I mean, what do you have to do on the things?
I think the fear is, or the concern is, and I think it's mostly a moot point, because I think the concern is what if you're in the outback of Australia or northern Canada or the Sahara and you have a glitch in your electronic system. I think that's the fear, more so, and you know, and it's truthfully, I think you have a much better chance of surviving on a modern bike, you know, even though there may be glitches occasionally, than you ever would have on a 60s Triumph.
Yeah, absolutely.
But it
I've
is,
broken down on a WLA in the middle of nowhere at night, and it turned out that the problem was I don't even know what it's called. There's a little bit of fibrous plastic that pushes the points apart.
I know exactly what you mean. Yeah.
It's riveted in, right? And it broke. What do you do? I mean, as it turns out, I was told later, you can in fact glue it up with a two-stage glue, and it'll work. But that seems pretty unlikely to me. I've never tried it. But there I was stuck. You know? By the same token, my then technical editor and I decided we would put the first of the Honda turbos up against the first of the Yamaha turbos and take them to a traditional biker meeting in the kind of the middle of Australia, the border of South Australia and Western Australia, which is in the middle of the Nullarbor crossing. Very long way, no services, nothing. We were 12 kilometres out of Nullarbor Station, which is one of the petrol stops, and the Honda stopped. Now, keep in mind, this was the first Honda Turbo in Australia, and it stopped. And my technical editor played around with it as much as he could. Couldn't get it to run. Bypassed the computer. Just couldn't get it to run. So I towed it into Nullarbor Station and stopped there. And I rang the motorcycle manager at Honda and said, "Look, you know, this is what's happened." And he said, "Okay, where are you?" And I said, "Well, in South Australia, Nullarbor Station." And he said, "Okay, we'll send someone up to fix it." And I said, "Where are you going to send someone from?" He said, "Oh, well, Adelaide, you know, capital of South Australia." And I said, "Stuart, we are 1,000 miles from Adelaide." And he said, "Can you be 1,000 miles away and still be in South Australia?" And I said, "Yes, just." And he said, "Oh, all right. Can you get home?" I said, "Well, I suppose so. We jump on the Yamaha and I'll carry the luggage, you know." And he said, "Yeah, well, look, do that. We'll get it picked up." So we did that, and there were many adventures as a result. The bike sat there for quite a long time because the Nullarbor is empty. No truck goes across the Nullarbor with anything but a full load, right? Because you lose money. So if they're in Perth and they need to go to Sydney, they will wait until they have a full load before they can go. So there's no room for the turbo. So in the end, the owner of the Roadhouse took it to the nearest railway stop when he was picking up kegs and almost destroyed it. It fell over in the back of his truck. But, and the problem was in the turbo, in the computer. We finally found out. So there you are, two examples of, although Honda Turbos are hardly modern bikes now, but it'll stand in for a modern bike, and an old bike. Things that can go wrong, things that went wrong, and that left me stuck. There's another part to the Nullarbor station story. We were obviously, what could we do? So we started drinking, and
Naturally.
by the time it got a little bit late, and there are cabins you could rent, so we rented a cabin, and after a few beers, my tech guy, who's paranoid by nature, said, "You know what? That's the first of the Honda Turbos into Australia. It's not going to look good that it broke down." I said, "No, why? Well, that's just the way it goes." He said, No. If I was Honda, I would send a bomber and I would blow this place up in the middle of the night. Nobody would know. Nobody would know. And we'd be dead, so we wouldn't be able to tell anybody. And I'd had enough to drink so that I became a little bit paranoid myself. And so we're sitting there debating the possibility that we would be dead sometime during the night, blown up by a fighter bomber from Japan. Needless to say, it didn't come.
There has been a lot of hand-wringing in the motorcycle world about finding this next generation of enthusiasts. And of course, motorcycling, the demographic, I'm not sure of the specifics in Australia, but generally I know in North America, there was at one point in the 70s, the median age of a motorcyclist was 23. Now the median age of a motorcyclist is closer to 63. And some people have said that it's the modern, kids can't afford motorcycles, or they're obsessed with their iPhones. The technology is of more interest than physically moving. Some people have said that the romance around motion is just gone, whether it be vehicles or motorcycles, because we understand the ramifications of climate change. What's your opinion on that? How do you see this relationship between younger riders and motorcycling, and the lack of them, presumably?
Yeah, I think there are a lot of things involved there. One factor that goes entirely the other way is price. Motorcycles are proportionately very much cheaper now than they were when I was first buying one. I remember the comparison then. The standard sort of family car in those days, Holden, which is a General Motors product, and a Harley Sportster cost more than a Holden family car. These days, a Holden family car costs nearly 3 times as much as a Harley Sportster. And so price, no, it can be a perception, but it's not a reality. The reality, one thing that's, I think, unique to Australia is Australians, contrary to the sort of public image that they like to project of themselves, we like to project, are risk averse. So motorcycles are risky. If you do buy a bike as a young person, you hide it from mum and dad. That may, I think, have something to do with it. But in general, kids need to be rebels. The image of a motorcyclist as a rebel is simply not around. We don't have Fonzies. We don't have Bronsons. We don't have the acceptable level of rebellion that was there in the 70s. Today, a PR image of a perception of a motorcycle rider is Charlie and Ewan, or I can't even think of anyone else. But these people are part of the system. They're not rebels. They're having a good time, and in their way, they've sold a lot of motorcycles, but they haven't sold a lot of motorcycles to young people. Young people don't identify with them, so you don't have that draw of rebellion, of individuality that there was once. These days, they get breaking or whatever else that young people do. My daughter, who's 35, has a PhD and works in administration at university, has a tattoo,
Oh, you sound like such a dad.
So I think that's a large part of it. The overwhelming emphasis on safety has also undermined the idea of rebellion, of risk, and I mean it's quite accepted that young people need to experience a certain amount of risk, or they grow up incapable of dealing with the world. So motorcycles always offered a bit of reasonably controlled risk. You could always fall off, and yes, you could always kill yourself falling off, but most people didn't, and it gave that impression of risk. So I think those kinds of things are powerful. I'm not at all sure that what's been listed, things like there are a lot of other things you can do apart from riding motorcycles, I don't think that's so important. I think that's a result rather than a cause. Kids look for something that shows rebellion, or shows that they're different, but not so different that they're not acceptable to their peers. And so they look for things and they find them. But those things are no longer motorcycles.
What are those things then? I mean, how do the young? I mean, I agree with much of what you said, but how do the young rebel if it's not a motorcycle? Because the motorcycle was the instrument of rebellion for generations, wasn't it?
These days, it's a computer.
There's more cachet. There's more cachet if you design an app than if you have a leather jacket and ride a motorcycle.
Oh, hell yeah! But also, even just playing games, it gives you a comparison point with your friends. Mm-hmm. There's even advertising, which unbelievably stupid advertising to my mind, which associates your score in a particular game with your life success. People say, "Well, no, you're an idiot." No, I'm not. I've got such and such a score in whatever the game is. But it works. I think clearly. So I think a computer offers more than one opportunity to rebel. Having your computer tucked away in your room, the door locked, is an act of rebellion, and you then play games or watch porn or whatever it is you do. I think the most powerful agent of rebellion, drugs, of course, play a substantial part there as well, and they always did. But it's computers.
What's your views toward motorcycle electrification? I know there's a lot of people who don't feel that there is a mechanical connection in the way that you have with internal combustion. So much of the motorcycle's character, even for someone like you who you claim you're not mechanically inclined, but you've owned some very interesting bikes, the WLA, a Gold Star, singles and twins, they have such a defining characteristic, the engine. And yet electric engines, at least we don't have a lot of experience with them, and they just seem sort of anodyne. What do you think about electrification? Will people modify their electric motorcycles and turn them into choppers and talk about the specs and in the same way that we would talk about putting big valves in your Ducati?
I don't think so. I think electric bikes will remain transport rather than an emotional involvement. I may be wrong about that. There may be exceptions, and certainly the acceleration you get from an electric bike is amazing, invigorating. I do think people will modify the bikes, but I suspect that it will be mainly things like paint. It won't be major structural modifications. I haven't seen the emergence of a style in electric motorcycles, in modification. But I may simply not be in tune with that kind of thing. I like riding them. I currently, and probably for the rest of my life, I have two bikes. I have a street twin Triumph and a BMW F750 GS, and those two kind of satisfy the needs that I have. But an electric bike or an electric scooter for around town, sure, quite possibly. But I've modified both of those bikes quite a lot, and I would not imagine modifying the electric bike. And the reason, I think, is that I can't really imagine forming an emotional attachment to one.
Is there anything that you haven't done in motorcycling that you would like to do that you can still squeeze in, or that you've missed, that age and the reality of living has put behind you?
Yeah, I have a fairly extensive bucket list, and whenever I cross something off, that something else pops up. But the things that appear on the list are probably not the kind of thing that you would even think of as a motorcycle bucket list. I mean, one is I've always loved the southeast of France, and one of the things I want to do is spend 2 or 3 weeks just riding around, enjoying the scenery, but also enjoying staying in a small hotel at night, eating the local food, drinking the local wine, exercising my atrocious French. That kind of thing will always be there. If it isn't France, I'm becoming more and more attracted to Spain. I think Spain has wonderful things to offer. For motorcycling, the north of Spain, Green Spain, is spectacular. It also offers 4 different nationalities, 4 different languages, and 4 different cuisines, and 4 different types of drink as well. So, you go from the cider at one end to the very dry Western wines. So there will always be somewhere I want to go and just see what's there. And I will always want to do that on a motorcycle.
You're listening to The Lowdown Show, presented by ADVrider.com and supported by ebaymotors.com. What is next for you? What's up next? motorcycle wise?
Yeah, that's a hard question. Next for me is much of the same. I have worked myself by various means into a position where I can satisfy my wishes, my urges in terms of motorcycling. I can ride pretty much anywhere I want in the world. I have the bikes I want, and I have the home I want. Although the house is getting too big since the girls left. As far as I'm concerned, more of the same. More of the same for me. Different places, different motorcycles, because I get to ride different bikes all the time. I do some work for Yamaha. They have a website and they like having little travel stories in there. So I get to ride all sorts of different Yamahas. I've got very good relations with Harley and Indian and Suzuki. So it's I have access to bikes, but there's no great life change for me, except, come to think of it, we are expecting our first grandchild next week, and there will be a major life change coming with that.
Let's wrap things up with a word from our sponsor. eBay Motors is here for the ride. With some elbow grease, fresh installs, and a whole lot of love, you transformed 100,000 miles and a body full of rust into a drive that's all your own. Brake kits, LED headlights, whatever you need, eBay Motors has it. And with eBay Guaranteed Fit, it's guaranteed to fit your ride the first time, every time, or your money back. Plus, at these prices, you're burning rubber and not cash. Keep your ride alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. Thank you for listening to The Lowdown Show.